The Phantom Battalion, how 300 dead soldiers became America's most secret army. Welcome back to Untold Vietnam Chronicles, where we dive into the most classified and impossible stories from a conflict that pushed the boundaries of what governments would do to win at any cost. Tonight, we're uncovering perhaps the most disturbing military program in American history, an operation so secret that the soldiers involved were officially declared dead while continuing to fight for years in missions that couldn't exist. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button for more shocking revelations about the hidden operations that redefine the limits of military ethics. Like this video if you want to discover how 300 American soldiers became living ghosts, erased from official existence while conducting classified missions in Cambodia and Laos that violated every international law and treaty. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love connecting with our global community of truth seekers. Now prepare yourself for the ultimate military horror story, because tonight we're exploring Operation Lazarus, the classified program that created an army of the officially dead soldiers who couldn't exist but couldn't stop fighting, trapped in a bureaucratic hell where death was just the beginning of their service to a country that had erased them completely. Chapter 1. The Impossible Death. The first indication that something was fundamentally wrong came in November 1968, when Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez's wife received his death notification and Purple Heart in the same week that she received a letter from him describing recent combat operations. According to the Department of Defense, Rodriguez had been killed in action on November 15, 1968, near Da Nang, South Vietnam. According to his letter, postmarked November 20, 1968, Rodriguez was alive and operating somewhere in Cambodia, conducting special reconnaissance with a unit that didn't officially exist. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez brought the discrepancy to the attention of military officials, who initially attributed it to administrative error and communication delays common during wartime. But her persistence in demanding answers eventually revealed that her husband's death had been deliberately falsified as part of a classified program that required soldiers to be officially deceased before they could be recruited for operations that couldn't be acknowledged by the U.S. government. Rodriguez was one of approximately 300 American soldiers who had been declared killed in action while actually being transferred to a classified unit that operated outside normal military command structure, conducted missions in neutral countries, and carried out operations that violated international law and congressional oversight requirements. The unit, officially designated as Detachment Alpha 7, but known among its members as the Phantom Battalion, consisted entirely of soldiers who had been declared dead and whose families had been notified of their deaths, while the soldiers continued operating under assumed identities in deep cover missions throughout Southeast Asia. The program was administered by a joint CIA-Pentagon task force that reported directly to the National Security Council and operated with presidential authorization that bypassed normal congressional oversight and military command authorities. Dr. James Chen, a Pentagon psychiatrist who evaluated Phantom Battalion personnel, later described the program as the most comprehensive identity destruction operation in military history, designed to create soldiers who could conduct any mission without political or legal consequences because they officially didn't exist. The Phantom Battalion recruitment process began with identifying soldiers who met specific psychological and operational criteria that made them suitable for complete identity erasure and long-term isolation from normal society. Candidates were selected from personnel who had demonstrated exceptional combat effectiveness, showed minimal family attachments, possessed specialized skills needed for classified operations, and had psychological profiles indicating they could survive extended periods of social isolation and identity confusion. Captain Sarah Williams, who served as the program's psychological screening officer, developed selection criteria that identified soldiers whose personalities and backgrounds made them capable of functioning effectively while officially deceased and permanently separated from their previous identities. The recruitment process involved creating fake combat situations where selected soldiers would appear to be killed in action while actually being extracted by special operations teams and transported to classified facilities for psychological and operational preparation. The false death scenarios were elaborate and included fabricated casualty reports, fake remains, and memorial services that convinced families and military units that the recruited soldiers had actually died in combat. Lieutenant Colonel David Morrison, the program's operational commander, coordinated the false death operations with regular military units whose commanding officers were unaware that apparent combat casualties were actually recruitment operations for classified programs. Once recruited, soldiers underwent comprehensive psychological reconditioning that destroyed their previous identities while creating new personas optimized for deep cover operations in politically sensitive environments. The psychological preparation included memory modification techniques, personality reconstruction, and intensive training in assuming and maintaining false identities under extreme stress and extended isolation. Chapter 3. The Identity Destruction Process. The transformation of living soldiers into officially dead operatives involved systematic destruction of their previous identities through psychological techniques that had been developed from CIA mind control research and Korean War prisoner of war studies. Dr. Margaret Foster, a psychiatrist who had worked on the CIA's MK-Ultra program, adapted interrogation and indoctrination techniques for use in creating soldiers who could function effectively while maintaining complete separation from their previous lives and identities. The process began with complete isolation that lasted for 6 to 8 weeks and was designed to break soldiers' emotional attachments to their previous identities, families, and social connections. During isolation, soldiers were subjected to sensory deprivation, sleep disruption, and psychological pressure designed to create dependency on their handlers while reducing their connection to their previous sense of self. The next phase involved creation of new identities that included comprehensive backstories, personality traits, and psychological characteristics that were optimized for specific mission requirements rather than personal preference or psychological comfort. Soldiers learned to think, speak, and behave as their new identities while suppressing memories and personality traits from their previous lives that could compromise operational security or psychological stability. The final phase involved integration training where soldiers practiced maintaining their new identities under stress while conducting simulated operations that tested their ability to function effectively as their assumed personas. By the end of the process, soldiers had become living embodiments of their false identities while retaining the combat skills and psychological resilience needed for extended deep cover operations. Chapter 4: The Cambodian Operations. The Phantom Battalion's primary mission area was Cambodia, where officially dead American soldiers conducted operations that could not be acknowledged by the U.S. government due to Cambodia's neutral status and congressional restrictions on military operations in that country. The soldiers operated under false identities as mercenaries, advisors, and intelligence operatives while maintaining complete separation from official American military presence in the region. Major operations included disrupting North Vietnamese supply routes along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, eliminating enemy command personnel, and conducting intelligence gathering that provided strategic information for planning conventional military operations in Vietnam. But the Phantom Battalion's most controversial operations involved collaboration with Cambodian military units and civilian paramilitary groups in activities that included assassination, sabotage, and psychological warfare operations that exceeded anything authorized for regular military forces. The soldiers' official death status provided complete plausible deniability for American involvement in operations that violated international law, congressional oversight requirements, and military engagement rules that governed official American forces. Sergeant Rodriguez's unit conducted over 200 operations in Cambodia between 1968 and 1971, achieving tactical objectives that influenced the broader Vietnam conflict while maintaining complete secrecy about American involvement. The psychological impact on the soldiers was devastating, as they were required to conduct operations without normal military support systems, legal protections, or acknowledgement of their service while being permanently separated from their families and previous identities. Chapter 5: The Laotian Nightmare. Phantom Battalion operations in Laos involved even more extreme violations of international law and military ethics than the Cambodian missions, as soldiers conducted operations that included drug trafficking, arms dealing, and collaboration with criminal organizations to fund classified operations. The unit's Laotian operations were designed to support CIA activities in the region while providing funding for operations that couldn't be financed through official military budgets or congressional appropriations. Captain Lisa Park led operations that involved establishing and maintaining drug trafficking networks that generated millions of dollars in revenue for classified operations while creating addiction problems that devastated local populations. The soldiers were required to assume identities as criminals and mercenaries while conducting operations that violated their military training and personal ethics, creating psychological conflicts that led to mental health problems and operational security failures. But the most disturbing aspect of the Laotian operations was the requirement that soldiers eliminate witnesses and evidence of their activities, including assassination of civilian personnel who possessed information about American involvement in illegal operations. The psychological preparation that had been designed to create effective deep cover operatives proved inadequate for soldiers who were required to conduct criminal operations while maintaining psychological stability and operational security. Several soldiers experienced complete psychological breakdowns that required their elimination by other Phantom Battalion personnel to prevent exposure of the program, creating a cycle of violence and paranoia that consumed the unit from within. Chapter 6: The Family Deception. While Phantom Battalion soldiers conducted classified operations in Southeast Asia, their families continued to believe they had died in combat and received death benefits, memorial services, and military honors for their supposedly deceased loved ones. The deception required continuous management by military personnel who provided ongoing support to families while ensuring they never learned that their loved ones were actually alive and operating under classified programs. Rodriguez continued receiving widow's benefits while her husband conducted operations in Cambodia, creating a bureaucratic situation where the government was simultaneously paying death benefits and operational salaries for the same individual. The psychological impact on families was devastating, as they grieved for loved ones who were actually alive, but could never be contacted or acknowledged due to operational security requirements and the classified nature of their assignments. Children grew up believing their fathers had died in combat, while those fathers conducted operations that they could never acknowledge or discuss with their families, even if contact had been possible. Some families began questioning the circumstances of their loved ones' deaths when they noticed inconsistencies in official accounts or received indirect evidence that their supposedly dead relatives might still be alive. Military investigators tasked with managing family inquiries developed elaborate deception operations that included fabricated evidence, false witnesses, and psychological manipulation designed to maintain the illusion that recruited soldiers were actually dead. Chapter 7. The Mental Casualties. By 1970, the psychological toll of extended isolation from normal society and continuous operation under false identities was creating mental health casualties that threatened the operational effectiveness and security of the Phantom Battalion program. Dr. Chen's psychological assessments revealed that soldiers were experiencing identity disorders, depression, paranoia, and psychotic episodes that made them unreliable for continued operations while creating security risks for the entire program. The combination of fake death trauma, identity destruction, family separation, and criminal operational requirements was creating psychological damage that exceeded anything documented in previous military psychological research. Soldiers began experiencing what Dr. Chen termed existential dissolution, complete loss of connection to their original identities combined with inability to maintain their false personas, creating psychological states that approached complete personality disintegration. The most severe cases involved soldiers who could no longer distinguish between their original and assumed identities, creating confusion about their names, histories, and personal relationships that made them incapable of functioning effectively in any capacity. Several soldiers attempted to contact their families despite specific prohibitions, creating security breaches that required permanent solution responses that involved elimination of compromised personnel. The program's psychological support systems proved completely inadequate for addressing mental health problems that were created by the program's fundamental requirements for identity destruction and social isolation. Chapter 8. The Security Crisis. The Phantom Battalion program's security began deteriorating in 1971 when several soldiers either defected to enemy forces, attempted to reveal the program's existence to journalists, or experienced psychological breakdowns that created exposure risks for the entire operation. Sergeant James Miller attempted to surrender to North Vietnamese forces while carrying operational documents that would have revealed the existence of the program and its violations of international law. Miller was eliminated by his own unit before he could complete his defection, but his attempt created awareness among enemy forces that American operations in Cambodia might involve personnel and activities that exceeded official American military presence. Captain Rodriguez attempted to contact his wife through intermediaries, creating a security breach that required extensive counterintelligence operations to prevent exposure of the program while maintaining the deception that he was deceased. Two other soldiers attempted to provide information about the program to international journalists, forcing operational security teams to conduct damage control operations that involved intimidation, false information, and elimination of potential witnesses. The accumulating security breaches forced program administrators to consider termination of the operation while developing procedures for permanent retirement of soldiers who could not be safely reintegrated into normal society. But termination of the program created impossible problems. Soldiers could not be officially acknowledged as alive without exposing violations of law that could lead to international legal action and congressional investigations. Chapter 9. The Impossible Homecoming. As the Vietnam conflict ended and American forces withdrew from Southeast Asia, the Phantom Battalion faced the impossible challenge of soldiers who could never officially return home because they were officially dead and had conducted operations that could never be acknowledged. Traditional military discharge procedures were impossible because the soldiers had no official military records, their service could not be acknowledged, and their operations had violated laws that made official recognition legally dangerous. The soldiers possessed knowledge of illegal operations, criminal activities, and classified programs that made their survival a permanent security risk for government officials who had authorized and administered the program. Dr. Foster recommended comprehensive memory modification that would erase soldiers' recollections of their service while allowing them to be reintegrated into society under new identities, but the technology and techniques for such extensive memory alteration were unreliable and dangerous. Alternative solutions included permanent relocation to isolated communities where the soldiers could live under assumed identities while being monitored by security personnel, or final retirement that would make their official death status accurately reflect their actual condition. Some soldiers were placed in psychiatric facilities under false diagnoses that provided cover for indefinite confinement while preventing them from revealing information about their service or attempting to contact their families. Others were relocated to isolated rural areas where they lived under assumed identities while being monitored by security personnel who ensured they maintained their cover stories and didn't attempt to reveal their true histories. Chapter 10. The cover-up operation. The termination of the Phantom Battalion program required comprehensive cover-up operations that involved destroying evidence, eliminating witnesses, and creating false documentation that would prevent future exposure of the program's existence and activities. All operational records were classified at the highest levels and removed from normal military archives, while physical evidence of the program's activities was destroyed or transferred to facilities where it could never be accessed by normal oversight procedures. Personnel who had administered the program were transferred to other assignments with enhanced security clearances and binding confidentiality agreements that prohibited any discussion of their involvement in Phantom Battalion operations. The families of recruited soldiers continued receiving death benefits and memorial acknowledgments while being monitored by security personnel who ensured they never learned about their loved ones' actual fates. Congressional officials who might have oversight authority over such programs were provided with false information or were excluded from briefings that might have revealed the program's existence. International legal authorities who investigated American operations in Cambodia and Laos were provided with documentation that denied any official American involvement in activities that might have been conducted by Phantom Battalion personnel. Most importantly, surviving Phantom Battalion soldiers were required to sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements under threat of permanent retirement if they ever attempted to reveal information about their service or contact their families. Chapter 11. The Modern Ghost. Decades after the Vietnam conflict ended, surviving members of the Phantom Battalion continue living under assumed identities while being monitored by security personnel who ensure their continued silence about operations that could still create legal and political problems for American officials. The soldiers' official death status has never been changed, meaning they cannot access veterans' benefits, medical care, or legal protections normally available to military personnel, while their families continue believing they died in combat decades ago. Several attempts by former Phantom Battalion personnel to reveal the program's existence have been suppressed through legal action, intimidation, and accidental deaths that eliminated potential witnesses before they could provide credible testimony. Modern investigation into the program is complicated by the destruction of records, the deaths of key administrative personnel, and the continued classification of any information that might confirm the program's existence. Journalists and researchers who have attempted to investigate reports of the Phantom Battalion have faced legal challenges, professional discrediting, and personal threats that have discouraged comprehensive investigation of the program. The soldiers' knowledge of illegal operations, war crimes, and violations of international law makes them permanent security risks whose continued existence creates ongoing problems for government officials and intelligence agencies. Some former personnel have reportedly been placed in witness protection programs under new identities, while others have been confined to psychiatric facilities where their claims about Phantom Battalion service are dismissed as mental health symptoms rather than historical testimony. Chapter 12. The Institutional Legacy. The Phantom Battalion program established precedents and procedures for creating deniable assets that have influenced subsequent military and intelligence operations in conflicts where official American involvement cannot be acknowledged. Modern special operations and intelligence programs include provisions for creating false death records and assumed identities for personnel conducting operations that require complete plausible deniability. The psychological techniques developed for identity destruction and personality reconstruction have been refined and continue to be used for creating deep cover operatives who can function effectively while maintaining complete separation from their official identities. Legal frameworks established for the Phantom Battalion program created precedents for bypassing congressional oversight, violating international law, and conducting operations that exceed normal military authorization without political accountability. The program's administrative procedures for managing families of deceased personnel while maintaining operational security have been adapted for subsequent programs involving personnel who must be officially declared dead while continuing classified service. But perhaps most importantly, the Phantom Battalion demonstrated that modern democratic governments could systematically violate their own laws and international treaties while maintaining public support through comprehensive deception operations that prevented exposure of illegal activities. The program's success in maintaining secrecy for decades, despite involving hundreds of personnel and extensive illegal operations, proved that sophisticated cover-up operations could prevent accountability for virtually any government activity if sufficient resources and authority were devoted to maintaining secrecy. Epilogue: The Soldiers Who Cannot Die. The Phantom Battalion represents the ultimate military horror story. Soldiers who were killed on paper but could never die in reality, trapped in a bureaucratic limbo where their continued existence was both necessary for security and impossible for acknowledgement. These men became living ghosts in service to a government that erased their identities while requiring their continued silence about operations that violated every principle of military honor and democratic accountability. Their sacrifice exceeded even the ultimate sacrifice traditionally expected of military personnel, as they were required to surrender not just their lives but their very existence, becoming non-persons who conducted operations that could never be acknowledged while protecting secrets that could never be revealed. The families who grieved for them continue grieving, unaware that their loved ones might still be alive but forever forbidden from contact or acknowledgement due to operations that required complete separation from normal society and legal protection. Today, the surviving members of the Phantom Battalion remain America's most secret veterans, soldiers whose service cannot be honored, whose sacrifice cannot be acknowledged, and whose existence cannot be confirmed due to operations that were too illegal to admit and too classified to reveal. Their legacy raises fundamental questions about the limits of what democratic governments can ask of their military personnel and whether any mission can justify the complete destruction of human identity and social connection. The Phantom Battalion proved that modern warfare could create casualties worse than death, soldiers who survived combat only to be erased from existence, conducting operations that made them criminals while serving a country that could never acknowledge their sacrifice. In the end, these 300 soldiers achieved a form of immortality that no warrior would choose. They cannot die because they were already declared dead, cannot live because their existence would expose crimes, and cannot rest because their knowledge makes them forever dangerous to the government they serve. The Phantom Battalion remains America's most classified military unit precisely because its members achieved the impossible. They became ghosts in service to their country while remaining alive to haunt the consciences of those who created them. Their story reminds us that in modern warfare, there are fates worse than death, and sometimes the greatest military sacrifice is not dying for your country, but ceasing to exist for it while continuing to live with the consequences of operations that history will never record. The soldiers of the Phantom Battalion won every battle they fought while losing the war for their own humanity, proving that victory in modern conflict can come at costs that exceed anything that defeat could impose. They remain America's most successful soldiers and its greatest failure, having achieved perfect operational security by becoming perfectly invisible to the society they served and protected. In the end, they discovered that the ultimate military sacrifice is not giving your life for your country, it's giving up your right to have ever existed at all.